Hello, you're welcome back once again to the last part of the tutorial series on the JavaScript creating a CRUD RESTful API. So we created our database and we sync that together with our ORM, which is what we have here. We have a controller as well, where we have the express route controller type, and if also we have the model, we created the service. And so lastly, all what we need to do now uh, is to connect that to our app file, and then we'll test it on any of the tools you have. You can use Postman to test this. You can use Insomnia. You can use RESTful client, or you can make use of Coil to test your API. So basically, what we need to do in this part of the tutorial section, we need to import out our express route, and then also together with our database as well. So we need to have that imported here. Then we have cons SQLize, which is our database. We have that in our controller file, so we use the require. So we want to require that from it should be wrapped in a string variable. We have that in our config, and we have that in the database. So that is for the database. And then let's also import a router that is coming from. I want to require that as well from the file part, which is, we have that from our controller and user controller file. Okay, so we now have all of our SQLize database sync and our controller file. Then we can just go right ahead and pull up and start sync our database configuration into our project by just using SQLize .sync. So this is like syncing into your project and just starting ahead with your database as well. So we'll sync that file, and then that is an asynchronous, so we can use the .10 to throw a message if it's successful or not. I believe so we can just log a message, just log a message of database connected. We can have a catch there as well. That catch, we can have an error, and we can just go ahead and have our error being printed out there too, there as well. This should all be wrapped together. Okay, so if there's an error, that will be thrown into this part of the try catch block. Okay, we'll have a database setup. Then we need to make use of our router at the same time. We'll just go ahead and say app.use. We want to work with the user router which we created, which is this one right here. So if we have other routes which we have there, you can also import them, and you can have like an index router file where you collect all your router and make use of them there, and just link it together with your app file, which is what we're having outside here on the main file. So everything is now set up and complete, so we can go ahead and run the command on the terminal once again, node index.js, or if you just want to have that as part of your script file in your package.json, you can set that up as well by you just running the command. And so whenever we run the command start, we want to run the this command, which is node index.js. So we can just have it that way as well. So let me just close this package.json file out, and let's run that command on our terminal. So since we have the script file in our package.json, instead of running node index.js, we can just start our server by running the command yarn start. Oh, this is the correct thing we have there. So yeah, our server is now started. We can go to Postman tool and test our connection. Okay, now good. I also wanted to take a look at something right here. Let me stop the server. So remember I said from the slide, I said SQLite is an in-memory database engine. So whenever we start a command, due to the configuration and the syncing which we're making here in our app.js file, we see that also gets added and our database is automatically created, which is what we have here. So let me delete that, start my server once again, so we see how that works. So just run the command yarn start, and we have our database created immediately here. So now let's go to Postman and test every of our routes and every of the controller which we created here. This is for the get, for the pull, for the create, for the delete, and for the patch, which is for our update. Okay, so here I'm using Postman. I have my routes created, and we'll be needing email, password, and ID. Based on what we have here, the instruction we want to use create user, and which is what we have here. And if you check in our index.js file, our port is on 4001. So the address for that is localhost, your port number, the slash, and then the route path which you have there. So now I want to create this user. Let me create Ugoji Emeka for the user who want to create, and then once I hit on the create button, you can see that get created, and we now have Ugoji Emeka created in our database. We'll see the ID here of 1 and the password which we imputed. So that is for the create. And now let's test the get all user. Now we only have just one user in our database, so let's send a get request to this part. So I have a route here for get all user, and let me erase all of these and just put that. And now once I make the get request, we have just one person in our database. We have Ugoji Emeka and all of that information. So let me create another user again. This time around, let me create Musa Ahmed, and then the password and email, let me just make it as Musa, and whatever we have there, let me make his password to be 1234. So once I hit the send again, we now have Musa created. This is his password and this is his email. So once we do a get of all user once again, we now have 2 users in our database. So now let's test the next endpoint, which is get a user by ID. So let me copy this, not to make any mistake on my part. So I have created a route here of get a user by ID. So let me paste that, which is get all user by ID. So this time around, if when we do a get all, the first person, the person with ID of 1 is Ugoji. Now let's just try to get that person on a get by ID. So when I hit on the get, you can see we have Ugoji and that. So when I make for the second person, if I pass the 2, that should return us a different record. Okay, you see we have Musa Ahmed. Now when I try to pass in an ID of 3, we don't have that. Let's see what will be the response we'll be getting. We're having null because that was what we responded from a service file. And then lastly, let us try to update the person with ID of 1. Now currently the person with the ID of 1, let's take a look at the record of that person. That is Ugoji Emeka, and we'll try to update that person of ID 1, and now we're changing the name to Adeyemi Juwon and all of this. So when I hit on the send, we now have that record being updated. So if I try to get that ID once again, this was the previous record we're having there. So if I try to hit it now, we now have Adeyemi Juwon coming out. So that is that. And lastly, let us test the delete endpoint of that. I want to delete the person with the ID of 2, and I think that was Musa Ahmed. So let us try to hit on that and user deleted. So if we try to get all once again, I think we should be left with just one record in our database. And yeah, so we have just one record. Now if I try to delete this person again, which is no longer there in the database, we got user not found, because that was the response we sent from our service file. If we take a look here, we said If there's no user, we should send back this response of user not found. So yeah, that is basically it in summary on how you can have a basic server with Express and JavaScript. And this is very, very basic, just like I said. Most of the things like error handling, error exception. Take for instance here, when we try to delete a user which is not found, you can see here we are getting a response of 202, which is accepted, and 202 fall within the success category. So if somebody tried to delete a record of a user which is not there in the database, you are supposed to send a 404 error response, user not found kind of response. That is the right way of doing it, but we're not doing that in this part of the tutorial. And if you want me to discuss on that and to handle that properly, you can drop that on the comment section. And so this is just basically overflow of how that goes. And in the next tutorial, we'll see how we can also basically implement this using Java, Spring Boot, using a Hibernate JPA and H2 database. So thank you very much for sticking around. See you in the Java section.